The first thing I knew was the cold. It was a hard, flat cold that pressed against my back and the backs of my legs, and it was the only thing that felt real. Then came the pain, a hot spike behind my right eye that made the world a blurry smear of gray light. I tried to lift my head, but the spike drove deeper, and a sound came out of my throat that was not my own. A woman stood over me. She was lean, and her dark eyes watched me without blinking. Long black hair was pulled back from a sharp face, braided so tight it looked severe. She wore a worn leather jacket over sturdy pants, and her hands were empty but held near her belt. She just stood there in the quiet room, watching me try to understand the ceiling. "Where am I?" My voice was a dry rasp. She took a step closer, and her expression did not change. It was a careful blankness, like a smooth stone. "You're in the clinic." "In Oakhaven." There were just sounds in the still air. I pushed myself up onto my elbows, and the room tilted. The slab I was on was metal. All around us was gray concrete, in the shape of broken equipment covered in a layer of fine dust. A single window high on the wall let in weak light, and the air smelled of old chemicals and something else, something sweet and rotten that made my stomach turn. It was a smell I felt I should know. For a moment, the chemical scent grew stronger in my mind, and it was mixed with the smell of burning plastic and hot metal and the screams of thousands of people. My whole body went rigid with a memory that was not a memory, a feeling of terrible heat on my skin and a sky gone black with smoke. The feeling vanished as quickly as it came, leaving me shaking on the cold metal. "What happened?" I asked, my hand going to my head. My fingers found the rough, raised line of a fresh scar that started at my eyebrow and disappeared into my shaved scalp. The woman knelt so her face was level with mine. Her eyes were very dark, and they scanned my face like she was searching for something. "There was a raid," she said, and her voice was low and steady. "A clan called the Gashhawks. They attacked the settlement. You fought them. You saved a lot of people before a piece of the wall came down." I looked at my hands. They were large and calloused, scarred across the knuckles. They looked like they knew how to fight, but I did not know them. "Who am I?" This was the question she had been waiting for. I saw a flicker of something in her eyes, a shadow that passed and was gone. "Your name is Bokha, she said, and the words were spoken with a strange finality. "You were our protector here." Bokha. The name felt foreign on my tongue. It felt like a costume someone else had put on me while I was asleep. My family? The woman's jaw tightened for a second, so small a movement I almost missed it. "Your wife?" she said, and her voice was softer now, almost gentle. "They killed her in the first wave. Her name was Alara. You were trying to get to her when you were hit." A new feeling bloomed in my chest, a hollow ache that joined the hot pain in my skull. It felt real. The loss felt like a part of me, a hole torn in a man I could not remember. I looked at this woman, at her calm face and steady hands, and I believed her. I had nothing else. She was the only solid thing in a world of gray fog and pain. She had given me a name. She had given me a reason for this ache in my soul. "Bokha," I repeated, and the name sounded a little more real this time. "I will avenge her." The woman nodded slowly, her dark eyes holding mine. A cold knot of purpose formed in my stomach, a hard stone in the middle of all the emptiness. I would find these Gashhawks. I would find the men who did this, who took my life and my wife from me. A sound cut through the silence. It was a piercing shriek from outside, a long, ragged noise that sounded like tearing metal, and a human scream twisted together. The woman's composure broke. Her eyes widened, and she was on her feet in an instant, her body coiled with tension. Another shriek answered the first, closer this time. I heard the scrape of claws on pavement. Her feigned calm was gone, replaced by a sharp, urgent fear. She grabbed a length of thick rebar from against the wall and shoved it into my hands. It was heavy, solid. My fingers wrapped around it, and my hands knew the weight of it, knew how to hold it. "They're back," she whispered, her voice tight. "We have to go. Now." The first drop of rain hit the cracked asphalt and left a dark spot the size of my thumb. Waz stopped dead, her head tilted toward a sky that was the color of a fresh bruise. Another drop hit my shoulder, then another, and suddenly the air was full of them, heavy and cold. "Inside now," she said, her voice tight as she pointed toward the skeletal remains of a strip mall. We ran, the ground turning slick with a film of wet dust under our feet. We ducked through the shattered glass front of what used to be a grocery store. The rain came down in a torrent outside, a gray sheet that blurred the world and filled the air with a roaring sound. The inside was dark and smelled of decay and old paper. Shriekers hated the rain, but they loved the dark, damp places it created. Waz pulled her kama from her belt, the small scythe a dark curve in her hand. I gripped the length of rebar I carried, its rough surface familiar against my palm. A sound scraped from the back of the store, a wet tearing noise that wasn't the rain. Then another joined it, a low clicking from the throat. They were waking up. Waz motioned for me to stay put while she peered around a toppled aisle of rusted cans. My body ignored her. My legs were already moving, my weight balanced on the balls of my feet. My mind was a blank slate, but my muscles remembered 1,000 dark rooms just like this one. A shrieker lunged from the shadows, its limbs too long, its skin pale and slick. Before I could think, my arm snapped out, and I threw a can of something that I had picked up without realizing it. It smashed against a metal shelf 20 feet to my left. The creature changed direction instantly, drawn to the sharp sound. Another appeared from a different aisle, and I kicked over a rack of old magazines, sending them skittering across the concrete floor. The second shrieker scrambled toward the noise, its claws scratching for purchase. My body knew their rules. My hands and feet moved with a brutal economy that was a mystery to my own mind. I was a stranger watching myself work. We moved through the ruin, me making noise, drawing them, funneling them into dead ends while Waz slipped past. We found a back office, the door half off its hinges. Waz slid inside, then froze. She held a finger to her lips. Huddled inside a metal supply cupboard was a child, a small girl no older than 5, with wide, terrified eyes. She was completely silent, clutching a small wooden bird carved from a single piece of a branch. Waz shook her head, her expression hard. We couldn't take a child. We could barely keep ourselves alive. I looked at the little girl, at the way her small chest rose and fell with each silent breath. I stepped past Waz, knelt down, and held out my hand. The girl flinched but didn't make a sound. I reached out and gently took the carved bird from her fingers. It was a crude thing, a hawk with its wings spread. I recognized it the way I recognized the weight of rebar in my hand, a knowledge without a source that sent a spike of pain through my temple. It was a gash hawk trinket. Waz saw the look on my face and her own went pale. She knew what it was. Her hand tightened on her kama. But I didn't care what it was or where the child came from. I scooped the girl into my arms. She was light, a bundle of bones and rags. Against Waz's silent, furious protest, I carried the child out of the office and through the now quiet store. We slipped out the back into the receding rain, leaving the confused shriekers trapped in the maze I had made for them. We huddled in a dry concrete culvert miles away as night fell. The child was asleep between us, wrapped in a tattered blanket. I looked at Waz, waiting for her to say something, but all she did was stare at the way I had moved, the way I had used the creatures against themselves. Her eyes were not looking at me, but at the monster wearing my face. We reached the highway overpass the next afternoon. It was a huge, broken thing of concrete and steel, standing over a dry wash filled with bleached white stones. The wind blew constantly here, a low moan that never stopped. The child walked between us, her small hand clutching the wooden bird. As my foot touched the cracked concrete of the bridge, a bolt of white-hot pain shot through my skull, from my scar straight to the back of my neck. I fell to my knees, my hands clamped to my head. The world dissolved into a storm of noise and light. I smelled smoke and blood. I heard screams, not from shriekers, but from people. A voice, my voice but deeper and harder than sandpaper, barked an order. West Wall. Burn it all. No survivors. I saw a man's face, his eyes wide with terror, just before a weapon I couldn't see struck him down. I saw the world tilt as a piece of the overpass above me groaned and then broke free. I felt a sharp, piercing impact at my temple, and then there was only darkness. I came back to myself, gasping on the concrete, the real world swimming back into focus. Waz was kneeling over me, her face a mask of fear. The child stood back, watching with those silent eyes. The voice, I choked out, my throat raw. The orders. Was I one of them? Was I one of the men who did this? This was the moment. The truth was there, hanging in the air between us. She could tell me. She could end it. She looked down at me, her expression unreadable. No, she said, her voice a cold, hard stone. They did this to you. The Gashhawks. You were a prisoner. They made you watch. I stared into her eyes, wanting to believe it more than I wanted my next breath. The story she gave me was the only thing holding me together. I collapsed against her, the sobs tearing out of my chest, and she held me while the wind howled around us, her lie a shield made of poison. We kept moving north, the feeling of being hunted a constant weight on my shoulders. The land grew drier, rockier. We started seeing the signs, crude symbols painted in what looked like rust on the sides of boulders and derelict cars. A broken gear, a hollow circle. I knew what they meant. The knowledge came with the headaches, a splitting pain that made my vision swim. Looted area, shrieker nest. I would see a symbol and my body would react, pulling Waz and the child in a different direction before my mind even understood why. We came across a narrow pass between two rock formations. An X eyes was painted over a circle on a rock at the entrance. Settlement marked for destruction, the knowledge whispered in my brain, followed by another thought, sharp and clear as a bell. Ambush point. I stopped, my head throbbing. We turned back, finding another way around. How? Waz finally asked later that night, her voice barely a whisper as we huddled behind a rock outcropping. How did you know that was a trap? I stared at my hands, turning them over and over. They looked like my hands, but they did things I didn't command. They belonged to someone else. I don't know, I whispered, and it was the truest thing I had ever said. Her face was tight with a fear that was no longer just about the world around us. A piece of the man she was hiding from was surfacing in me, and he was keeping us alive. I could see her wondering how long it would be before he drowned the man she had invented. A dust storm rolled in the following day, a towering wall of brown that turned the sky orange and then black. The wind shrieked, flinging sand that stung any exposed skin. We found shelter in a long concrete aqueduct, its high walls offering a reprieve from the gale. It was a perfect trap. We were halfway down the channel when his voice echoed from the rim above, amplified by the concrete walls. Still alive, Wabo? I have to admit, I'm a little disappointed. I looked up. A thin, wiry man stood silhouetted against the dust-choked sky. He had a starved, wolfish look, and even from this distance I could see the crude tattoos covering his arms. Other figures appeared behind him, members of the Gashhawks, their weapons ready. I am not Wabo, I yelled, my voice sounding weak in the vast channel. The child hid behind my legs. Waz stood beside me, her kama in her hand, her body rigid. The man, Ozaka, laughed, a dry, rasping sound. Still playing the fool? I only did what you were too reckless to do, old man. I wrote you a better ending. A glorious death fighting off 100 shriekers. The clan loves that story. He then turned his gaze on Waz, a cruel smile spreading across his scarred face. He still doesn't know, does he? Go on, girl. Ask Wabo who put that comma through your husband's heart. The world stopped. The wind died. Everything went silent except for the frantic beating of my own heart. I turned to Waz, my mind screaming, a desperate plea in my eyes for her to deny it, to say he was lying, to say anything. She just stared back at me, her face a canvas of agony and guilt. Her silence was a scream that tore my world apart. In that same moment, a different shriek echoed from further down the aqueduct, the sound of the undead. The dust storm had woken a nest. Chaos erupted. Ozaka's men dropped ropes, scrambling down the walls. In the confusion, 2 of them grabbed Waz, disarming her and dragging her toward a rope ladder. The first of the shriekers scrambled over the far wall of the aqueduct. It didn't lunge for the gashhawks. It lunged for me. Ozaka's laughter echoed down the concrete canyon as he left the butcher he once followed to be devoured. The name Bokha evaporated, leaving only the confused, horrified monster, Wabo. I was alone in the concrete tomb, the child gone, was gone. The shriekers were closing in from both ends of the aqueduct, their guttural clicks and high-pitched calls bouncing off the walls. Despair washed over me, a cold, heavy tide. I was a murderer. I was the man who had destroyed Oakhaven, the man who had killed her husband. There was no reason to fight, no reason to live. I could just stand here and let the world end. Then I saw it, lying in the sand where she had dropped it. Waz's Kama. The small hand scythe, its curved blade dull in the gloom. The very tool of her husband's murder. My murder. I walked over and picked it up. Its leather-wrapped handle felt like it was molded for my hand. I held the weapon, its weight a terrible anchor. I could die here in the dark as Wabo, the monster, the memory. Or I could live, just a little longer, as Bokha, the man she tried to make me, the lie she built to survive. A shrieker shrieked, its claws scrabbling on the concrete as it charged. I did not run. I raised the weapon, met its dead, vacant eyes, and moved to meet it. I had a promise to keep to a man I had created. The Kama felt like it was made from my hand, a cold extension of my will. I did not think as the first shrieker came close. I simply moved, dropping to one knee and sweeping the curved blade across its shins. Bone and tendon parted with a wet snap, and the creature tumbled forward, its momentum carrying it into a useless heap on the concrete floor. Another came from the side, and I drove the heel of my palm up under its jaw, a memory of violence guiding the blow until its neck broke with a loud crack. The knowledge was a flood, a torrent of brutal tactics and anatomical weaknesses that had been locked behind a wall of pain. Now the wall was gone, and I saw the world through two sets of eyes. Wabo's eyes saw a dozen shambling targets, a tactical problem to be dismantled piece by piece. Bokha's eyes saw the path to Waz. Thunder cracked overhead, and the rain began to fall in earnest, sluicing down the high walls of the aqueduct and turning the sandy floor to mud. The shriekers hated the water. It made them clumsy and slow. I used that. I ran toward the deeper pools forming near the center of the channel, forcing them to follow me through the muck. I used the echoes from the thunder to mask my movements, stepping silently while the sky roared. I used the Kama to cripple, not to kill, leaving wounded creatures screaming on the ground to draw the others into confused piles. They were predictable, single-minded things, and Wabo had studied them like a scholar. I climbed over the writhing bodies of the things I had maimed, my boots sinking into pale flesh, and pulled myself up a service ladder at the far end of the concrete tomb. I stood on the edge of the aqueduct, the bodies of dozens of shriekers behind me. I looked north, toward the distant plume of smoke that marked the sump. They thought they had left a monster to die. They had no idea they had just unleashed something far worse. I was not hunting for revenge anymore. I was hunting for redemption, and I knew all their secrets. The journey was a blur of grim purpose. I moved at night, using the cover of the storm, something Wabo would have never done. The arid landscape was alive in the dark, but I was now the apex predator. I reached the interchange as the storm was breaking, the clouds churning in a dark gray sky. The sump was just as I remembered it. A fortress of jumped cars and razor wire built around a truck stop, its lights cutting yellow holes in the gloom. Ozaka was arrogant, but he was not stupid. The main gate was a death trap, and the walls were patrolled. I did not go to the walls. I went to a large drainage culvert 100 yards west of the compound, its opening covered with a rusted iron grill. Wabo had insisted it be left as a runoff, a way to keep the compound from flooding during the rare storms. He also knew it was the one structural weakness he never bothered to reinforce. I tore the grill from its concrete housing with my bare hands and crawled inside. The pipe was narrow and smelled of stagnant water and rust. It opened into the back of the maintenance garage, right beneath a heavy workbench. I pushed aside a loose section of the floorboards and pulled myself into the familiar space. The air was thick with the smell of diesel and old grease. I could hear the Gashhawks shouting to each other outside, their voices rough and loud over the rumble of the generator. I found a spare set of clothes, a dark shirt and heavy canvas pants, and armed myself with a long, heavy wrench from the workbench. I was a ghost inside my own machine. I moved through the shadows of the compound, my feet silent on the oil-stained dirt. Wabo had designed the patrol routes, the blind spots, the very rhythm of this place. I slipped past a pair of guards sharing a cigarette, their talk of the woman Ozaka had captured turning my blood to ice. He had her in the main building, waiting for the entire clan to gather. He was going to make a show of it, a public trial to turn his lie into a legend. I made my way to the comms tower near the main building, a rickety structure of welded scrap metal. At its base was a small shack that housed the PA system controls. It was where Wabo used to give his proclamations. It was my old throne room. The lock was new, but the doorframe was old and splintered. I broke it open with my shoulder and stepped inside. The equipment was simple, a microphone and an amplifier connected to speakers all over the compound. I could see the gathering through the shack's dirty window. Ozaka stood on a platform made of stacked pallets, gesturing wildly. Waz was there, tied to a steel pole, her face bruised but defiant. Ozaka was shouting about the ghost of Wabo, about the lies of the Oakhaven woman, cementing his power with every word. I took the microphone, its cool metal a familiar weight in my hand. I took a breath, and when I spoke, it was not my voice, but his. It was the deep, rasping voice of Wabo. Ozaka left your leader to die. The sound echoed across the compound, a voice from the grave. Every head snapped toward the speakers. Ozaka froze, his mouth open. I have returned from my clan. Chaos was immediate. The Gashhawks were a clan built on the absolute authority of one man. Their fanatical loyalty was a weapon Wabo had forged, and it answered only to his voice. A man near the front, one of Wabo's original followers, drew his weapon and shot one of Ozaka's personal guards in the chest. The compound erupted into a civil war. Men who had stood shoulder to shoulder minutes before were now tearing each other apart, their loyalty to the symbol of Wabo overriding everything else. As the factions tore each other apart, I slipped from the shack and ran toward the west side of the compound. A deep pit was dug there, fenced with sharpened steel. Wabo had it built for executions, a place to dispose of enemies and discipline failures by feeding them to captured shriekers. A heavy winch controlled the main gate to the pit. I put all my weight into the crank, the gears groaning in protest. With a final heavy clank, the gate slid open. The starved, agitated things inside flooded into the compound, their shrieks adding to the sounds of gunfire. I ran through the mayhem, using the shriekers as a shield. I reached Waz and cut her ropes with a knife I had taken. Her eyes were wide, filled with terror, and something else, something I could not name. A desperate Ozaka intercepted us as we tried to reach the garage. His face was a mask of rage and fear, his leaf spring blade held tight in his hand. His final fight was short and brutal. He was a vicious brawler, but Wabo was a warlord. I sidestepped his wild swing, hooked my leg behind his, and threw him to the ground. He looked up at me, gasping for air, expecting a final blow. I offered him nothing. I did not grant him a warrior's death. I simply grabbed him by the collar and threw him back toward the center of the compound, where the shrieking tide was rising. Ozaka screamed as the first creature leapt upon him. I grabbed Waz's hand. "It's over," I said, pulling her through the chaos, the dying screams of the Gashhawks a funeral pyre for the man named Wabo. We escaped as the sump burned behind us, the rising sun casting long shadows from a distant ridge. The air was clean after the storm, and for a moment, the world was quiet. The freedom was a real thing, something I could feel in my lungs with every breath. Then we saw them, a line of headlights on the horizon. It was a Gashhawk patrol, returning from a long scavenge, peeling away from the disaster at their home. They were too far away to see us clearly, but their radio was still working. A distorted voice crackled over the distance. A recording of my broadcast carrying on the morning air. I have returned for my clan. The lead driver killed his lights, his silhouette stark against the dawn. He was not looking at two survivors running from a massacre. He was looking at the second coming of his god, the resurrected prophet who had cleansed the clan of a usurper. I pulled Waz closer, her body trembling against mine. We turned our backs on the burning fortress and walked on, finally free, and more hunted than ever before.